everyone. Thanks for joining us for another book discussion between Ann Arbor District Library staff and the Unerased Book Club. Tonight we are discussing a book of essays called How to Read Now, and this is by Elaine Castillo. And before we get started, we're just going to do a quick introduction so people can put voices to names. I'll start. I'm Lucy. I am a library tech here at Ann Arbor District Library. I do some youth programming and a lot of book discussions, and I am a white woman, 51 years old, with shoulder-length brown hair, glasses, sitting in front of a wall of watercolors.
I'll jump in. I'm Beth. I am also a library technician in the outreach team of the Ann Arbor District Library. I am a 62-year-old with dark hair and wearing a pink shirt, and behind me are a couple of windows and some plants.
I can go. I'm Anne. I am a bookshelver and processor, and I'm a 45-year-old white woman with long brown hair. I'm sitting in a slightly messy office.
I can go next. Hi. I work at the Ann Arbor District Library as a desk clerk, and I'm excited to be here today. I've participated in several other Unerased Book Club discussions, and they're always awesome. I am a white, middle-aged male wearing glasses with short cropped hair, sitting in an anonymous conference room.
Yeah, I suppose I'll go next. I'm Gretchen, a bookshelver processor as well at the Ann Arbor District Library. My first Unerased Book Club, so excited to be here. I am a white woman, early 30s, with glasses and long blonde hair in a pretty flattering corner of my office here, just kind of blank wall, some animal photography, but.
Hi, folks. My name is Fatema. I am one of the co-facilitators for the Unerased Book Club. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Bangladeshi woman with the short black hair, wearing a blue sweater with some flowers on it, with a digital background of pink fluffy clouds behind me. And I'm really glad to see both returning and new folks in the room.
And hi, everyone. I'm Sheela. I am the founder and other co-facilitator of Unerased Book Club. I am a South Asian woman in my early 30s, also with short shoulder-length black hair, and I'm wearing glasses, wearing a very old running race t-shirt, and behind me is a blurred background because it does not look good back there. And I'll just to give some context to what we're reading this month. Like Lucy said, we're reading How to Read Now, collection of essays by Elaine Castillo. And it's a set of nonfiction narrative essays and literary criticisms to help the reader understand how they interpret reading, whether that's visual medium or audio or the things that are around them in their day-to-day lives. And I'll actually, I have full transparency, I haven't finished reading this yet, which I'm happy. I think we'll start talking about. I'm sure we'll talk about the actual content of the book soon. So I'm going to really heavily depend on Fatema, who actually selected this book for this month. And with that, I'll open it up and just ask people, what did you think of the book? How far did you get? What were your first takes?
I'm happy to start. I got through the whole thing. It was definitely a chewy book. There was a lot going on, and it reminded me a little bit of grad school just from the language used and the analysis going on. So it kind of put me in a different form of reading just right off the bat, because I was having to slow down and really digest what I was reading. So yeah, I found it really thought-provoking.
Yeah, I agree that I found it. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Gretchen.
Oh, okay. I'm I apologize. I was just going to follow that up with, I agree about with Anne about the chewier sort of content. Made me miss being in college and just talking about literary analysis in a room and things of that nature. And I was actually doing a lot of comparison for me personally. My degree is in creative writing, so like I was sort of applying that knowledge from like my degree and just how I, read and have been taught to write, and just things that I've since learned about publishing. And it was, also really thought-provoking. I finished reading it as of this afternoon, actually. Okay, I'm sorry about interrupting.
No, that's okay. It's we all have stuff to say, which is great. I was going to say the same, that I found the content. Well, I like Anne's word, chewy, so we'll go with that. But there was a lot in there, and it kind of like really, it just really made me think about the way that I take in content, the way I read. I think of myself as being a pretty critical reader, and this book made me think about the fact that I need to sort of look more closely at the way that I'm reading things, and especially the parts about, I thought about empathy and reading, and about like positive representation, and all these sort of buzzwords that I feel like are thrown in front of a lot of the reading that we do right now to give it value almost, and to make it seem worthy. And so all of that just really, it's really had me sort of looking at a lot of the reading that I do differently. And so I appreciate that. And I did finish it. I got through the bibliography kind of notes today, which I actually loved reading. They were hilarious. So yeah.
I'll hop in. I also finished it this afternoon, but I guess I'm going to need to read the bibliography. I mean, I kind of glanced, but good to know that it's funny. Also, yeah, I felt like I had to really absorb what I was reading. And I was also referring to, looking up words and looking up concepts, looking up other works. So one of the things, a couple takeaways for me was like, she really doesn't like Joan Didion at all. I know of her, I don't read her stuff. But also she was just so just very intelligent, but also very, had a natural way of talking as a millennial. I thought she was really quite informative.
I'll say I didn't finish the book, unfortunately. It's a collection of essays, and so I love essays, and that form really speaks to me. So I was excited to get to read what I ended up reading, which isn't not all of it, but sort of bounce around. I made sure I read the first essay and the final essay, and a few in between as I could. I loved that this writer loved language, particularly classics, Western classics, I guess you could say, in the like canon of like ancient Greek writers, in particular. And I have a background in that in college myself. She made me think differently about some of those classics, and elevated some voices within that canon that I wasn't familiar with. I like the word chewy that Anne used to describe these essays. I would add incendiary. I would add surprising. And I would say that some of them really kind of made me, like, knocked me off kilter when I first read them. So As usual, it made me think of other great essays and writers' voices, but I'm excited to talk today and hear what other people thought of them all. There's a lot to talk about, I feel like, in these essays.
I love all these descriptions that you all are giving, and I want our listeners to know, not be intimidated by the use of things like this is reminding us of grad school and heavy literary analysis. I found the book extremely accessible for the content that it is, which I really love. And it is very, very thought-provoking or chewy. Like, it just gave me so much to think about, both as a reader, like someone who consumes a lot of literature and has over the years really shifted what I read. So going from reading a lot of, when I was in high school, reading a lot of African American literature, to in college reading a lot of the Western canon, especially as a classical studies person as well, and then eventually shifting towards more Asian American and other lit. So this was really a cool way to think about it, and I think she challenges us for a variety of matters. Especially this concept, Lucy, that you've already brought up, which is like empathy, and thinking about the role of literature or reading in building empathy for things, because I think that's a narrative that we tend to rely on very easily, but she kind of challenges that for us. And I would love to, I've heard all of you say that it like really made you examine your own thinking. And I'd love to like start unpacking some of that as much as you're comfortable doing, and like what triggered, like what kinds of thoughts or insights or reflections you had as you were reading these essays. And we can start with the empathy if folks are comfortable, or we can jump around.
Yeah, and before we do that, I want to explain why I just haven't been able to get through this book. And it's not because it's not well written. It's because each essay requires a lot of like respect, and not like just speed reading or a cursory glance. Like you can't just like get through a page. It takes quite a bit of focus because Elaine, the author, does a good job of kind of going on tangents and then bringing you back. And I know that this year has been not the best year for me to have that concerted time to sit down and read through it. So I'm glad that she's chosen the essay to communicate these ideas. So if you don't have a lot of time, you can get through one, sit with it, and you're not missing out if you're not able to get through all of it.
Related to that, I found that when I was initially reading through, I wasn't seeing necessarily the connection between all of the essays. Some of them seemed very separate from each other. But as you read more and more, like little things from earlier get referenced again. And after I read it, I went back and reread the author's note at the beginning, and it just kind of solidified everything and made it make sense as a whole.
Well, I will just jump in a little bit about empathy and why I found that concept so thought-provoking and interesting, and also just made me examine the way I read, because I do think that like we are told to read for empathy a lot of the time. And I feel like in the past, 5 years or so, there have been a lot of lists that have been created around the idea of like reading these to build empathy. And what that does is it's requiring education and teaching from a certain group of people. It's like, I think she says in this book that like, if we're told to go to certain writers to read empathetically, then we're told to go to those writers, like, writers of color or queer writers, or we're told to go to those writers for, to learn something about them and their culture and build empathy around that. And that makes this assumption that other voices essentially the white voice, right, is universal, and that we just go to that to read. And when you say that and when you read it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I just have never examined the word empathy as it's applied to reading, or thought about how it's not necessarily the right word, and how it can erase some things. And it just, yeah, I mean, just so right off the bat, right in that essay, I was like, wow, I've got a lot to think about the way I consume things.
Yeah, that first essay is, I think I had a real image of my mind as this writer like running through a corridor, just like flames trailing in her wake, just like so much is happening in this essay to kind of unsettle maybe a white liberal reader. I think that's deliberate, right? And obviously this is a book published in the last couple of years, and so she's very much responding, I think, to what you're mentioning. We see the kind of proliferation of lists that have probably of, hey, let's read diverse books, which sounds on the face of it like, hey, yeah, great idea. But it doesn't, I think that belies, like, it doesn't ask anyone to like dig a little deeper if we're just like, what is the intent behind reading diverse books? Castillo, I think, like, specifically looks at that term and kind of says that I'm not interested in that. I think the first, in as a writer of color, I'm not really interested in like producing a diverse book for someone, for a white reader, to read and sort of get educated by and go, okay, on to the next. Like, I got my fix of empathy from this writer of color. That was my sense of that first essay.
One of the things you were talking about, the kind of intended discomfort, and I almost wonder if that's where her use of language is coming from, because I questioned throughout the book several times who the intended audience was for it. And then when I went back and was rereading on page 6, it specifically says that it's not just for the literary crowd, it's for everybody. And that specifically makes me think that this is intended to make us feel uncomfortable and feel like we need to go look up these words and look up these concepts and do the work. Like, she's forcing you in reading the essays to do the work that she's talking about, to kind of elevate it above that just base reading.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I think that one of the things that this book really just honed in on for me was this idea that we all need to be critical consumers of the media and everything else that's around us. And I think that there's been a huge shift in our attention span, like we've read, in other books before, and generally because of social media and other things, that we just want everything to be in super digestible, tiny nuggets, as opposed to like really doing the deeper work. And a lot of times we're also taking things at face value when we should really be interrogating it and putting it in a larger context. And I think she's very much arguing for that throughout. And she's doing it in a really interesting way, where she's challenging other concepts around what we consider to be normal or average or universal. And so this empathy thing, I highlighted a line in my book, that I from that chapter on empathy. The story I'm telling is not just something for you to feel sympathy for, rage against, be educated by. It's a story about you too. And I love that idea, because I think that that's something, as a writer myself, I see other writers of color talk about it, and I worry for myself, is that if someone gets my book, are they going to be questioning whether or not my book will be able to find an audience? Because I write about Bangladeshi Americans, right? Or Bangladeshis in general, because that's who I am and that's my experience, those are the stories I want to tell. But I'm worried that the publishers are going to think that that's too niche, right? That it may not find a home. Whereas I like to think that anyone can find a home in any story because of the themes and certainties associated. So should we be, like, this essay really made me question, like, how should we reframe the joys of and benefits of reading other than this framing of it teaches us someone else's perspective or it teaches us empathy? And I don't have a good answer for that. So I'd love it if you have ideas as librarians, like what are the reasons we should tell people to read more, or to get out of reading if they do read?
I
It's
have
a hard. Oh, so go ahead.
Sorry. I have something kind of coagulating up here. I don't know that I have a full answer to that yet, but Castillo mentions empathy empathy as a practice rather than a destination. So I think that might be speaking to more empathy as engagement. So or engagement as empathy. So just the fact that we have to look up some of these terms, or really back away from the essays at points and digest it, and maybe reading any of these works and translating that into action or different practices, less teaching us empathy and more of providing an opportunity to practice it, engaging in media or other people's stories to practice reading, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's one thing, and I think just kind of to keep talking about that, I really liked her term of the unexpected reader, and how she has always been the unexpected reader for all these books that are basically being written from the same place. And I think that is kind of or at least for me, a useful way to start reframing the way I read, and maybe to start to look at where I am the unexpected reader, right? Or try to find those places. And because what that does is that has me doing what you're talking about, Gretchen, which is that, having to engage in the act of reading and look things up and learn beyond, because this is not, I mean, just because if you've been the expected reader for all the books always, then you're going to feel uncomfortable when you're not. And I just that there's something about that term that I find very interesting and very helpful in a way to just keep thinking about, as a way of reframing consuming media and reading for me.
Yeah, I would agree that term just resonated with me. I think the unexpected reader, and I was thinking about my own reading and different genres and different, even just reading about the history of rap, say, for example. I read that and think, I'm not the intended reader, or maybe I am. I don't know. I don't think it matters really, as long as you're reading and getting something out of it. As far as the empathy part, my initial thought about that was, I tend to be empathic anyway, and so I think that's how I'm going to read anything. I'm going to always be thinking about how someone's feeling, or what is their action, their life, just putting myself in their shoes, sort of thing. And have really as a young kid. So for whatever that's worth, I think I'm always going to be empathic when I read, because that's just how I am.
Yeah, I think that there is a difference between using reading to contextualize what you're trying to understand about the world, which I think is the intended idea around reading builds empathy, as opposed to, okay, I've read these suggested books, check, 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 I'm empathetic now, or I understand the entirety of the experiences that are not mine. And I feel like that the latter is really what we've been seeing, or like it's almost been weaponized as like, oh, I've covered my butt, or like my liability is minimized because like I can say what I want because I've read these books, as opposed to, oh, I've read these books and I have more questions. And I have more things that I really need to understand. And I'm going to go find second, third, fourth degree books from that.
I kind of liked her brief zoo metaphor, or the tourism metaphor. And I think that's where you get into problems, where it's like you're just swinging by to view the diversity, and then you finish the book and you're done and you're gone, and never to think about it again.
Yeah, I love this idea of inspiring curiosity. I think that when I was younger, especially, or even now as an adult reader, I would get sucked into. I remember the first time I read Aesop's Fables. Right, I moved to America when I was 9, so English was second language, and it took me I didn't grow up with these fairy tales and things like that. So the first time I was able to read it, I read it on my own. And I was so fascinated by the myths and fantasies around it. And then I like kind of went off and read all these other, the essentially English fairy tales and multiple retellings of them. And I was super curious. And I think that that's something we don't see a ton of in the way that this checklist of diversity and diverse authors is talked about, right? Where it's like, oh, you really enjoyed this particular like thematic mystery and these characters, and you want to keep diving, or like you're really into fairy tales, and well, here's like a list of fairy tales from this particular region or something like that. I think if we could push towards that, that would be really cool, because I love as a reader, I often do read from a space of curiosity. I'm like, I just want to learn more about this subject, and I go deeper and deeper into it. And I think that's what keeps me going as a reader, as opposed to constantly searching for something novel to read. Yeah, the deepening.
It's interesting to hear you talk about like reading when you were younger and remembering reading Aesop's Fables. And that was something I was thinking about when you were like, what would you tell people then? Why should they read if it's not for empathy? And I think one thing I might ask people is like, what do you remember liking, if you did, liking about reading or consuming this type of media? Like when you were young, like for me, there was something about, I loved reading, and like why I wasn't thinking, I didn't have an agenda around it. I felt, I don't know what, transported, just curious. So it's like, if there's a way, like you're saying, Fatema, that we could just start there and then, build lists from there and sort of take these reading pathways from there. But I think that it's like kind of going back and maybe erasing some of what we've heard and what we've learned as adults, that's sort of clouding the way we're approaching things.
And I don't know how much she touched on this in the empathy essay, but I think that one of the challenges we're facing right now with all the book bans and everything is that people are really scared of readers becoming curious and empathetic about others, right? They don't want to expose children or young people to narratives that are different from them because they're worried that people are gonna start seeing themselves in it, or they might I don't know, they might become empathetic. I hate to use the word, but and now, but they might, and so there's I think that fear really does come from the space of, or like all of this is coming from a space of like, we don't want you to become so familiar. We want to be able to other. Yeah.
Yeah, she talks about that in that first essay in particular when she's discussing Jane Austen and the application of contemporary political worldviews for folks who have not read the book, just in the context of Jane Austen or any of her contemporary or any of her white contemporaries not being very much occupied with what was going on in their spheres and not recognizing the plight of folks of color that they might have been around, and how contemporary analysis will look at this political and social impact of those things. But there's pushback on that, and Castillo mentions that and just says that a lot of the work of undoing our baseline assumptions is about acknowledging just the fact that we need to acknowledge that looking at things and realizing the truth of them isn't vandalizing or censoring any of these legacies. You can still like Jane Austen, even if you recognize, that slavery is wrong now as it was then. And just, if anything, knowing more context expands what you know about the book. So yeah, I do think that it's accurate to say that there's a fear around becoming more empathetic or curious, or truly examining or asking questions about the background of things that you take to be fact.
I think I have one, that was well put, Gretchen. I wanted to add one more thing to this. I'm thinking about how I was struck by Castillo talking about white supremacy as an education, and her very first essay, and how, it's often framed, I think, as, oh, just people are ignorant. And who are the people? They're never named. Yes, racism exists, but there aren't any racists, or there's just this, I don't know. It's a kind of blinkering of a kind of education. It's a very stunted, very particular kind of education, and I was surprised by this characterization of white supremacy as an education rather than a sort of ignorance. It is a willful, educated, taught ignorance that has a lot of dangerous implications. It stunts people. It stunts everyone, I think, was maybe was what Elaine Castillo seems to imply. And I think that's a very helpful frame. I want to just also, some of the things that you all have said I just want to say I'm envious of y'all who read voraciously as children, as young people. I don't think I quite, got out of Boxcar Children Land, in Archie comics. So it's really interesting, and just to hear, some of your stories. And I mean, Elaine Castillo is one of you, right? She read with a curious mind, boomeranged all over the world, all over cultures. And that really was cool to read how her father seemed to just Yeah, absolutely. Like, was cheering her on as she read whatever the heck she wanted. And she wasn't reading with an agenda in mind. She wasn't limited. And somehow through reading so much and so widely, she began to find, her voice. And I guess as an adult, I'm able now to like think about how, yeah, I mean, these great writers didn't just spring from nothing. They read widely, they read curiously, and I think they developed that, the all important word, that empathy, as a result, a byproduct, really, not as like maybe a thing they set out to acquire.
I will just quickly say I don't think there's anything wrong with Boxcar Children Land or Archie Comics, Lauren.
Yeah.
I love both those things. So I'm just going to put a plug in for those.
Thank you, Lucy.
I was going to echo that. Absolutely. And to your point, Lauren, the relevant quote in the book, and I really love this entire paragraph, where she talks about how white supremacy is a comprehensive cultural education whose primary function is to prevent people from reading, engaging with, understanding the lives of people outside its scope. And then she goes on to say that writers of color are expected to, to provide or do a lot of work, a lot of academic work, right? To learn about forgotten history, harrowing tragedy, community destroying political upheaval, genocide, trauma, that we expect those writers to provide those intellectual commodities the way their ancestors once provided spices, minerals, precious stones, and unprecious bodies. And that, that shook me a bit, especially as someone who co-curates a selection of reading material for this book club. And Sheela and I talk about this. We're like, we need a light read, we need a fun read. And I think at one point Sheila's husband said that we read a lot of sad things. And I felt that here because I do want to read diversely, and I don't want to read things of like joy or, I don't know, frivolity. That's just coming from white writers. I want the mediocre and the messy and the fun and the quote unquote pointless, or the dessert version of these things from writers of colors just as much, and not to feel weighed down as a writer of color to only tell the stories that haven't that contain these types of trauma. Yeah.
I just want like the list of books written by X hyphenated American that isn't all about trauma. I want and not this specifically about joy. I just want books that we would see as part of the Western canon, quote unquote normal books. But I want those lists. I want that curated list to build empathy. I don't want to read somebody's trauma all the time. And maybe it'd get my husband to join our book club. So stop complaining about how all our books are sad.
Well, yeah, just finding books about how people exist in the world, and the whole range of feelings around that, and we accept that from certain writers and groups of people, but not from the people we expect to educate us about the difficulties and the sad things, so.
Yeah, I can't remember, unfortunately, who to attribute the quote to, but when I was on Twitter, I saw someone tweet one time that, maybe we will have come close to achieving a real diverse selection of movies when every demographic has about 7 mediocre rom-coms, to its name, but.
I would totally agree with that. And every demographic would have 7 mediocre holiday rom-coms, because that genre also needs to be expected. My month of December needs to be diverse. Thank you. I do consume a lot of holiday movies. Speaking of film, she actually touches or spends quite a bit of time on film, both in Asian films as well as in her essay, The Limits of White Fantasy. And I'm curious if you got to those essays, what your I'm sorry. I'm laughing because I'm seeing that in the chat, which our viewers can't see. Sheela said she wants a Halloween rom-com. I'm here for it. I also want like a Muslim rom-com, like, something around Eid. I'm Muslim, so that's an aside. But yes, to all the holidays. Yeah, so if you read either, The Limits of White Fantasy or Autobiography in Asian film, I'd love to hear your thoughts around this and talking about representations in our visual media.
So this essay, I think, pulled me in the quickest. I mean, like most people, really love visual media, I love reading good analysis of TV or movies. And a lot of the movies I watch, unfortunately, don't come with that analysis. I watch a lot of Indian movies, and the analysis just isn't at that level yet. There's not an incentive for people to write it. And so to see this for a show that I haven't watched, but like viscerally remember the conversation around in 2019, Castillo talks about Watchmen. Sorry.
Yeah.
Watchmen. Yeah. The new one that came out on HBO, I think, in 2019 with Regina King, and the way that she massages apart the fibers of the structure and lets you see kind of in between the lines, was just phenomenal. And I loved the way that she goes into depth about where the different homages are, who's inspiring these different supposed side characters, what that means in the context of our American history, and then going from our past to our imagined present or reimagined present, and what that means in terms of Asian anti-Blackness and the impact of American past, present, and continued imperialism, and what that looks like in a reimagined world. I don't know. I was blown away by that, and I was like, "Ooh, more of this, please." But yes, we need to read critically. Also means to examine the visual media that were presented critically.
Yeah, I have been hearing about Watchmen, and yeah, when I was reading her description, I was like, that's it. I'm watching it tonight, but that was yesterday and I didn't, but maybe tonight. I just when it came out, it got a lot of press, and we'd never heard, and it wasn't, knowledge about the what happened in Tulsa. So anyway, I do look forward to reading that. I loved her description. I was fascinated.
It is interesting, though, that because this is something, not reading Watchmen critically, when I watched it, I was, I guess, pleasantly surprised with the complexity of the Black American story, but completely missed the fact that the Vietnam side of things was very surface level. And it goes to show how you can start opening your eyes to something and still be completely blind to something that's almost exactly the same, just a slightly different context, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, I completely, that's exactly how I would put my watching experience of Watchmen. I felt, and reading her analysis, I was like, well, I got that, but whoa, I totally didn't get that. And so yeah, I think what you're saying, Anne, is spot on. And it also makes me want to watch it again now, thinking, well, wait, she gave me this. And could she do this for every show that I'm going to watch? please.
Yeah.
Because it would be super helpful.
Yeah, like the way she referenced some of the characters and explained, their historical significance that you wouldn't have known. I would, and so I can go into it and understand a little more. But yeah, she really did a deep dive, and it would be nice to have a little, pre Elaine Castillo blurb before lots of things.
It's interesting though, because that falls into that unpaid labor.
Well, I was going to say, but we'd have to pay for it first. Like,
Yes.
we'd get her PayPal from her,
Oh,
and
yeah.
then reimburse her, and then she could provide it. Truly.
Yeah. I only mean like in a natural way. Like if she were to write another book, I would do it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think Anne was talking about that part where she was like, yeah, I'll give you that list, but here's my PayPal,
Yeah, PayPal. That's how she ended it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that came to mind when she, she was writing about, now I've blanked out, I'm sorry. I'll have to collect my thoughts.
That's totally fine. I think I did not watch the Watchmen, though it has been on my list for ages. But I think that it just goes to show like the layers of things that we don't see. Some of those things and I want to point out that it's something that can be learned, right? Like you don't have to be at the level of this author to be able to do this sort of analysis or something like that, right? For example, there are romantic comedies that I loved as a preteen or teenager, and that I look back at now and I'm very cringe about the whole thing because of misogyny and sexism. And now my capacity to be able to spot that and be like, oh, that was gross, right? And I think we all sort of develop that over time based on what we expose ourselves to, and start to be able to see it. Or right now, I think there's I love all the conversations around size and how sizeism and fat phobia is represented in the media. And because I grew up at a time when a woman that I would now think was very slim was told that she was really, really fat, right? And so being able to kind of see that over time. So I don't know, I've been taking it as a personal goal to start learning so that I can have a critical lens and I can start looking at things and being an informed viewer, if not necessarily a critical viewer, but certainly an informed viewer. Yeah, and I think she's kind of challenging us to do that.
Yeah, it's more of the idea of empathy as a process and just an ongoing thing rather than checking books off of a list. There's also nothing wrong with enjoying your fluff, or I'm not a big fan of the word or the term junk food entertainment, but no shame in enjoying that kind of thing or anything, as long as you're not turning off your brain completely.
Well, yeah, I have finally reached that point where I can understand that something may be problematic or may not be nutritious and still enjoy the hell out of it. So yeah, it's a good place to be.
I think one of the things that she challenges us to do really is to take our blinders off, and recognize where our blinders are, because half the time we don't even know we have them on. If I had talked to 16-year-old me, I certainly wouldn't have recognized that I was in my very white, homogeneous, white Iowa town, that I wasn't seeing a full spectrum, because I had read Their Eyes Were Watching God, or what, like I had had these little moments and thought that it was something. And it was the beginnings of that learning, but I don't know, the capacity just expands over time.
Yeah, that seemed to be her point in bringing up the Harry Potter franchise and the X-Men franchise. Personally, it was really interesting and kind of, just helpful for her to put a name in front of a particular incarnation of the X-Men franchise. Like she names a name, and it's I haven't Googled him, but I would venture to say probably a white dude's name, Chris Claremont. Chris Claremont's X-Men is this beloved, cast of characters and stories that represent like kind of this struggle for marginalized peoples to mutants to be counted and like to matter as much as humans. And wow, like in a out of my like 2023 mouth, like hearing me say that is like, whoa, okay, we got some things to look at here, because all these, she brings this out in a way that I think is really useful, interesting, like saying, wow, I wonder like where did they get such a story? She highlights kind of a debt to marginalized authors or peoples or voices, histories that isn't acknowledged really. It's sort of like, again, the problem of like these characters all being mostly like white, and the universal struggles being centered in white bodies and the problems of that, the harm that comes from that. And yeah, I mean, I liked, she seems really humane in saying like, hey, like, I'm not a Potterhead, but like, I know a lot of friends are, and they're having to mourn like this particular, like, narrative legacy that they read as little kids and really impacted them. And now they have to kind of square that with this, the words, the really harmful, transphobic remarks of the story's creator. That's not an easy thing to do. And I saw her humanity in kind of handling it in this way, but also saying, yeah, like to your point, Anne, she's kind of laying it down like, hey, there's more critical work to be done, everybody.
Yeah, the discussion of how fantasy is my genre, so this was very eye-opening for me, that we basically take the struggles and the trauma and the challenges of the minority. That's not the right word. I can't find my words. But it steals struggles and gives them to the white characters, as a way almost of making it relatable for the expected audience of white readers.
Yeah, to really expand on. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Just to expand on fantasy, like this is a conversation that comes up quite a bit in online tabletop role-playing game spaces, especially ones that deal in Dungeons and Dragons and any of the Tolkien-esque fantasy with the sort of 5 races of man. I'm doing air quotes here, but you look at some of that, especially the earlier editions of that, and just a lot of baggage in fantasy, and a lot of taking white writers taking struggles that are not theirs and putting those into a fantasy universe and like giving them pointy ears. But with tabletop, at least, there's the potential for people to like reclaim those narratives and make their own stories, around their tables or on their streams or things like that.
Go ahead, Lucy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, along with that, and the fantasy is the dystopian piece too, like the story that I was struck by, that Handmaid's Tale that she brings up there, because I have heard, like Margaret Atwood say in interviews, I've never written anything that's not true, that's not real in the world. And I think people hold the Handmaid's Tale up as like it is the dystopian tale right now of this time, because it's been made into this show with multiple seasons, and the book is still read even though it was written in 1985, and yet where did these stories that Margaret Atwood saw were true come from? The Philippines, right? And there's no recognition of that. And yes, I think so it's more palatable to make it a white story and a white struggle, and it will be more universal and more widely read, I guess, and just yeah. So it was just really interesting, like that particular one. I think to look at the theft there of where those stories came from. Just another example of that.
We are at the top of the hour, but I wanted to kind of wrap up our conversation. This book is obviously so rich, and we only touched on like 3 essays out of all of the essays there. So I highly recommend it. Just so much food for thought. But, given that it's given us so much to think about and to examine in our own reading practices or viewing practices, I'm just curious if some folks would mind sharing like an intention that you might be leaving with as you are consuming literature or media right now. I can go first. I think one of the things that really that I really took away from this, or that I hope that I bring into my reading now, is to kind of look a little bit closer at historical context. This book club has really helped me in learning more historical context around like Asian Americans, but I don't think that I do that for other groups, other communities, and so I would really love to supplement my reading with a little bit more of that contextualization.
Well, I personally look forward to finishing this book.
I will be watching The Watchmen, but also taking into account what you said, Fatima, like, historical context and, just more critical. I mean, I think we're all probably pretty critical readers, but there's a lot of layers. So look at all the layers.
Yeah, I would say, like, along with the historical context and the layers, like to question where the stories are coming from that you're receiving, if you're not being told specifically, like try to examine where these thoughts and ideas maybe came from. And I think you, Anne, had said something about taking blinders off, but also learning to recognize where your blinders are, and that is a process. They're not going to come off all at once. You're not going to see where they are all at once, but to keep working on that would be my intention.
I think in connection with the contextualization, which, just reading this, I was looking up words and concepts, and I definitely made a list of things I want to read and movies I want to watch, because she has a visual and literary vocabulary that I'm not familiar with. But I also, that concept of the unexpected reader, trying to first find books that I'm not the expected reader for and engage with them, but also try and read from the perspective of, even if I am the expected reader, from trying to look at it from the perspective of somebody who's not the expected reader, and what kind of experience they are probably having with the material.
Yeah, I suppose going forward, just I think I have similar goals in terms of like learning about context and reading more broadly, but I think I'm going to try to lean more into that sort of discomfort of that, I, as a, very white lady, might be experiencing, because that is, a sign that I still have some growing or some thinking to do. And, just to really lean into that, try and figure out why, and try and apply that going forward.
Yeah, there's like way too much to talk about in these, and I didn't even read the whole book either, right? But one thing that I want to slip in, and I think it's kind of answers your question, Fatema, is the example of the Odysseus myth comes up in one of the essays. And, this is something that is near and dear to me. I've read it several times, read little pieces of it or tried to in ancient Greek. I think I distinctly recall she's centering she focuses on the Polyphemus, like the Cyclops episode in Odysseus's travels. But what kind of struck me was that she points at something that's odd, and she follows like this trail of, that's really odd. Wait, like this guy, this Cyclops is supposed to be uncivilized. He's this hideous, giant brute. But wait a second, he's like gently caring for a flock of sheep. And we're witnessing Odysseus break into his cave, like, and steal. And what's going on here? And rather than just like, nothing to see here, let's keep going. What else is Odysseus going to do? I can't wait for that skewer, so you can best this hideous giant. To really think about that was like modeling a type of reading and curious reading that I hope to take with me into my future readings.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for this discussion. I'm so glad that you all read the book and that I got a chance to talk about it, because when I read it, I was like, I need to be able to talk about this. So this is wonderful. And thank you for also inviting us to do this series with you all. Next month, we're reading Light from Uncommon Stars. It's a science fiction and fantasy novel by American author and poet Haque. And it was also nominated for a Hugo Award for Best Novel.
I think this will be our first fantasy novel. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for putting these books in our hands and leading us in this discussion. This one really made my brain buzz, and so it was like super cool to discuss it with people. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It was cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.